Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. My name is Don Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. During this program, we showcase interesting guests who present evidence from science, along with other important facts, validating the truth of creation and the accuracy of God's Word. Today, our guest is Dr. Danny Faulkner. He has graduate degrees in physics and astronomy and has taught at the University of South Carolina, Lancaster for over 26 years. He's been extensively involved in the creation science movement, writing many articles and serving on the board of directors of the Creation Research Society. Several years ago, Dr. Faulkner retired as a full professor and now has joined Answers in Genesis in Kentucky as a full-time scientist and speaker. Dr. Faulkner, it's always good when we have you here with us on Origins.
Thank you, Don.
What a privilege. Now, today we're going to talk about space aliens and the Bible. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, are you a science fiction fan?
I'm not a big fan, but I do enjoy particularly some TV shows and movies that deal with those kind of things. And science fiction is fun. I think an important point to make is that science fiction is, after all, fiction. It's not.
Maybe
it's
a little
story.
More fiction than science.
And you should be trying to make a point with it, and there's always a good teaching opportunity there. But yeah, science fiction's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do we begin?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to point out that UFOs are actually very popular things.
Oh, they sure are.
I think aliens, a whole bit, really gets people going. And I've just illustrated with a few images here. Can you recognize some of these, Don?
Oh, I know Dr. Spock up there.
Mr. Spock. Not,
excuse me.
Yeah.
Not Doctor. Right. Doctor was the guy that wrote the book. Yeah.
He wrote the book, yeah.
Mr. Spock, excuse me.
Mr. Spock, live long and prosper. Do you see any others?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Well, this is the Ferengi from the later Star Trek episode. His name was Quark, I believe. We got the Day the Earth Stood Still over here. That's a classic sci-fi from, I think, close to when I was born back in the 50s, but it's one of the most...
Back in 1990 when that came out.
No.
Okay.
It was a long time ago, but they've been popular. For instance, can you recognize some of these?
I know Mork from Mork and Mindy.
Yeah?
Although I was more of a Mindy fan.
I think most guys were. Yeah. But, Robin Williams was a very funny man.
Yes, he was.
First I ever heard of him.
Yeah, that's where he broke in.
Do you recognize the one above that?
That's out of Star Wars, isn't it?
No, close. It's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, okay.
Done about the same time. And, of course, then we have, this guy.
That's what I was pointing to. Yeah.
Oh, okay. He's Darth Vader.
Darth Vader. He's the bad guy, right?
Yeah. So anyway, these things are very popular, as you might see. Well, with anything in life, we really, as Christians, we use the Bible as our authority, and so it's important to turn to them. So it's good to find out what the Bible says about aliens.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Although I'm questioning how much we're going to find, but let's look.
Why, have you read the chapter about aliens somewhere?
No, but I've read the Bible.
But you haven't found a chapter
I
in there?
haven't found an alien.
Well, that's good
force,
because they're not talked about directly in the Bible. But you know what? So many times there are things that the Bible does not directly address. But what you do there is, if it doesn't say anything about this, then you have to kind of cast about. Can you recognize by these, by the way?
I know Elf.
Okay, Alf.
And I know Men in Black.
Men in Black, okay.
That's as far as I can go.
Okay, that was E.T. on the right there. That was a classic movie.
Sure it was. Now that you say that,
I do. 1980s. That was, remember the Reese's Pieces?
You'll have to forgive me.
Okay, I thought you might know those.
But
But again, the Bible doesn't say anything about UFOs, doesn't say anything about ETs, all these sorts of things. But like so many things in life, we can apply biblical principles.
Precepts and principles.
Precepts and principles. Do you recognize any of those?
Oh, come on.
They got the call box there. That's Doctor Who. He's an alien, by the way. I'm not a big Doctor Who fan, but Doctor Who is supposedly an alien. The other one's from Star Trek, and the other one's from the Simpsons TV show. So lots of things out there. Okay, what about biblical principles?
I've got to stop reading theology and start watching more cartoons.
Uh-oh.
I guess, or something like that. Here we go.
That's a bad idea. But before we get really going in this, perhaps we ought to define a few terms, because I find people mix terms up and get very confused.
Help me, Doctor.
On all of this. All right. For instance, the first one we want to define is ET. That stands for extraterrestrial. Extra meaning outside of, terrestrial meaning the Earth. So presumably these are space aliens or creatures from somewhere else. And LGM. Do you know what LGM stands for?
No, I don't.
Little green men.
Oh, sure.
They're always indicated as, aliens, little green guys. I don't know why they want to do green, but that's what they're always
Well, that's better than anything I was thinking of, so that's good.
As it turns out, ET is a very precise term.
Uh-huh.
Flying saucer, however, is not. But I'll define a flying saucer as some sort of spaceship probably flown by LGMs, I guess. And what I'm concerned about is many times people confuse flying saucer with this next term, UFO, unidentified flying object. And that is a precise scientific sort of term, if you will. Have you ever seen a UFO?
No, sir.
Well, you know what? I have many times.
Really?
Sure, yeah. Well, think about it. If it's up in the sky and hovering or what, not falling, it's in the sky, it's flying, it's an object of some sort, and it's unidentified. So it's
unidentified to me, that's
so it's unidentified, it's flying, and it's an object. If you've ever seen anything in the sky, you didn't know what it was, then you know it was a UFO.
Okay.
So have you seen any UFOs?
I guess I've seen a lot of those.
If not, you've not been paying attention, is what I always tell people, because everybody sees them eventually.
Some they know what it is.
Contrast that to an IFO. An IFO is an identified flying
like
object.
An airplane or a helicopter.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I must tell you, I'm batting 1,000 on this. Every time I've seen a UFO, I've been able to turn it into an IFO.
You could track it down and find out what it was.
Well, just figure it out. You don't have to track it down, but figure it out. A lot of ways you can do that. And that's always should be our goal. Unfortunately, some people kind of give up kind of fast. They see an object in the sky, they don't know what it is, they immediately conclude it's a UFO, it's a flying saucer, they're done. And that's really probably a bad approach to take on all of this. Well, I want to make 2 notes. Do you like this? I love this flying saucer. Isn't that cute?
He's up off the ground.
He's flying, yeah, he's on a saucer. But he's not an alien, I don't think.
I hope not.
Anyway, 2 notes. First of all, a UFO and a flying saucer are not the same thing. You know, I used to give planetarium shows back when I was in grad school many years ago, and over the years, this is before I started giving creation presentations, and I'd give a talk on astronomy, and particularly after planetarium shows in the Q&A, at least every show, somebody would raise their hand, and they would ask this question. Quite literally, they would say, what about UFOs? And what I was hearing was, what about unidentified flying objects? And what I was hearing was that, but what they're asking, what they really meant to ask was, what about flying saucers? Because people were using these 2 terms interchangeably, and that's not a good thing. Many times people sloppily say that. I've sometimes listened to a late night AM radio show, overnight show, and they consistently use the word UFO when what they're clearly meaning is flying saucer. And I think they do that intentionally, because if you say flying saucers, people think, ooh, kind of weird stuff.
Doesn't have the credibility as if you say UFO.
But if you say UFO, then it sounds technical, it sounds like you know what you're talking about and you can be trusted, and what they really mean is flying saucer. So I encourage people, if you mean flying saucer, say that. If you mean UFO, say that. But they're not the same thing. Once you've identified it, by the way, if it is indeed a flying saucer and you've identified it, it's not a UFO anymore, is it, by definition? So keep that in mind. Number 2, our primary goal with any UFO is to make it an IFO.
To identify what's unidentified.
Yeah. And if you make that conversion from a UFO to an IFO, then you've done your job. Unfortunately, many people quit way too soon. I think it's because they want to believe in these UFOs as being flying saucers. And I've stuck with it every time, and I think if you stick with it, you'll be able to identify most of them. Not always. By the way, if you can't figure out what it is, does that mean it's a flying saucer?
Of course not.
No, of course not. That's a logical error to think so. All righty. A couple of important questions.
That's the Jetsons.
Yeah, very good.
See,
that goes back early 60s, when we were little kids, right?
I do remember that.
That was a fun show, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It's like the Flintstones set in the modern, future times, really. But a couple of important questions is, where do ETs come from? Let's just assume for a minute that ETs exist. And if they do, they have to come from somewhere. And if they do, presumably they come from other planets. Now, these are either planets within our own solar system, like Mars or Venus or something, or from planets orbiting other stars.
Probably far, far away.
Far, far away, it would seem. Of course, that's a problem in transportation. Don't have time to talk about that today, but presumably other planets out there. Now, if that's the case, you have to really ask the question, if you really want to get the question of where do ETs come from, it's not so much other planets, that's the immediate answer, but the ultimate answer is, where did life on those planets come from? All right? Now, there are really only 2 possibilities. Did they evolve? That is, was there no life on this planet, and then there was life, and then it evolved into what we see today? Or did God create them? And, I would hope that people would believe the Bible if they believe in ETs. I believe that ETs exist. I think that they would believe that God created them. However, many people in the world think that life just arose spontaneously. And by the way, if you believe it arose spontaneously on other planets, you probably believe it happened here on the Earth.
I would think that your worldview would affect those two things very much. That's right.
And so they're intimately related to one another.
That's right.
The real question is not about ETs. The real question is where we came from. That's really the underlying, it's a worldview question. You've identified it very clearly there as a worldview sort of question. So the real question is the origin of life on Earth. Did we evolve or did we just happen? You see, if we just happen, there is no creator. If there is no creator, there's no such thing as sin. If there is no sin, there is no creator, there's no such thing as death as a penalty of sin, there's no need of salvation. Jesus Christ never laid down his life in atonement for sins for us. It's a direct assault upon the gospel message and Christianity and the Bible at its core.
Absolutely.
And so there are two worldviews, and I want to give you a couple of examples, maybe a couple more, of how this drives science today. We have two journals up here, one of them called Astrobiology, and the other one called the International Journal of Astrobiology. Notice that term, astrobiology, the study of life elsewhere in the universe.
So it's the study of life elsewhere. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And one of these journals has been around for, I think, a dozen years, the other one 15 years. One of them's a quarterly and one of them 6 issues a year. And each issue packed with articles about presumably life elsewhere in the universe. Let's see, they've had what they call the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI for short.
Right.
Looking for radio broadcasts from other planets
right.
around other stars. They've been doing this since 1960.
Right.
They have terabytes of data. How many signals have we found?
The big O.
The big O. Here's an example of this sort of thing in SETI. You've got the Arecibo radio dish. That's the largest single radio telescope in the world. This is on top of a mountain in Puerto Rico. It's on a naturally occurring depression up there. And this big bowl is, I don't know, a few hundred feet across, and you've got a radio receiver here. It's limited in where it can point. They steer it by moving this around, these cinches and these towers. This has actually been featured in movies like, for instance, Jodie Foster 20 years ago starred in a movie called Contact. It was based on a novel written by Carl Sagan about the first contact with a civilization detected that way. Part of it, I think, was filmed here. Certainly it was filmed out here in a radio telescope array in New Mexico. Real telescopes used as a backdrop, if nothing else. So they were looking for life on other planets through all this, and of course they found something there. Otherwise, you have no story. But it turns out that there is a lot of this. The search continues to go on all the time on these things. Frank Drake, who started the first SETI experiment in 1960, came up with the Drake equation, trying to estimate how many civilizations might be out there we could listen in on. And it's a product of 7 different factors he puts together, like how many stars have planets and how many have life and all this kind of stuff. And how many of those actually have numbers associated with them?
How many of them have any life?
Well, 0 so far.
So that's where we are.
Yeah, so we do this SETI, we do other experiments. We've been looking for extraterrestrial planets, trying to find planets like the Earth where life could exist. And we found about 2,000 planets now orbiting other stars. Do you know how many of those are Earth-like?
None.
So we have several lines of evidence all suggesting that I think scientifically we can conclude that we are alone according to the science. And I can stand here today as a scientist and say, because of the data we have, the best conclusion we can reach is we are alone in the universe. Now somebody may say, well, wait a minute, the data may change next week, next month, next year. And that's certainly true, but come back and talk to me then is my response, because we can't base scientific conclusions upon what we don't know. We can't base it on what we might know in the future. We have to base our scientific conclusions on what we know right now.
Facts? Yes.
Scientific facts as they now exist,
Yes.
those scientific facts can change, of course, unlike biblical facts.
Okay.
But if we base it upon what we know right now, the best science, you come to the conclusion we are alone. And that's a very definite answer, I think.